What he's gotten away with is absolutely incredible. It wouldn't have happened with me.
I believe the reason that Donald Trump says that this war would be over within 24 hours is because he would just give it up.
Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, over 70,000 Russian soldiers, 70,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and 10,000 Ukrainian civilians have died. These are, of course, rough estimates because this is one of the sloppiest wars we've ever seen. The United States and the European Union have been fumbling the ball on the Ukraine war for the last 2 years. This war has been bleeding money, lives, and resources. And what do we have to show for it? What progress has been made? What has changed? And what do Donald Trump and Kamala Harris plan to do about it? Let's examine. Welcome to Swing Voter Central. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the Biden administration has forked over more than $113 billion in support. Where have all those dollars gone? And why did we end up here in the first place? It all starts with NATO. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is a political and military alliance founded in 1949, just after World War II. In the beginning, it was just the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, Italy, and Portugal, the original 12. NATO's primary purpose was defense. An attack on one is an attack on all. That's the motto of NATO. And since the Cold War with Russia was getting a little frosty, these countries saw a need to form a military alliance for protection. Over the following decades, more countries jumped on the NATO train and formed an alliance. As you can see, many of these are Eastern European countries, very close to Russia, and some of them are even former Soviet satellite countries that were a part of Russia's USSR. This made Russia extremely uncomfortable. It felt like the enemy was closing in, with NATO countries popping up all around the Russian border. And of course, if you add Ukraine to the equation, it creates not only a military strategy nightmare for Russia, but it also cuts into Russia's sentimental heart. Because in the eyes of Russia, Ukraine is their nearest and dearest brother, like twin brothers. Did you guys watch that interview with Putin and Tucker Carlson where Putin just went on for like 30 minutes without taking a breath about the history of Russia and Ukraine and how Ukraine has always been a part of Russia, which is actually true. Ukraine was part of Russia for a century and a half. It was annexed under Catherine the Great. And then it wasn't released from Russia until the 1950s. And then it was taken back again under the Soviet Union. And then it was independent again in the 90s. Vladimir Putin has made it crystal clear that Ukraine is a main artery in the beating heart of Russia. Even in 2014 when he took Crimea. And I know that, okay, the developed world, the West, let's say, really shunned Putin for the way Crimea was taken. Crimea, this tiny little peninsula may look inconsequential, but the location is fabulous. Located on the Black Sea, Crimea is home to some stunning beaches and mountain landscapes. It's been a popular tourist destination for Russians since the 19th century. Second, it is a very strategic military location, right on the Black Sea with access to North Africa and the Middle East and the Mediterranean. And it elevates Russia's ability to position missiles. Ooh, it's also home to the Black Sea Fleet, which is actually probably the biggest reason why Russia wants Crimea. The Black Sea Fleet is located in Sevastopol, and it has been the base of Russia's Black Sea Fleet since the 18th century. And the Black Sea Fleet defends Russia's southern borders because Russia has a border on the Black Sea, as well as several other countries, which is why this particular sea is so incredibly important when it comes to military strategy. So Putin has a million reasons to want Ukraine, particularly Crimea. And so in 2014, Putin came in and they hosted a referendum, a vote for the people of Crimea. Do you want to go back to being a part of Russia, or do you want to remain Ukraine? And the criticism, okay, first of all, the people voted to go back to Russia, which is not surprising to me at all, because the entire portion of Eastern Ukraine is pro-Russia. Maybe not everybody, and maybe far less people now after the war began, but in the past, For example, anytime there was a pro-Russia president, this part of Ukraine, this region, would always vote for the pro-Russia president. These people identify with Russia culturally, linguistically, they speak Russian, they eat Russian food, they watch Russian television. So it's not surprising to me that Crimeans voted to go back to Russia. The problem is that the western part and even the central part of Ukraine identifies with the West and with Europe. And this part of the country really wants to be European. They would like to be part of the European Union, as a matter of fact. And above all things, at least more strongly at this point, they would like to join NATO. Right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine became a partner of NATO. They weren't an official member, but they were a partner. So this invasion of Ukraine has been escalating since the 90s. Everybody saw it coming. Putin really, really loves Ukraine. He really thinks it's part of Russia, and it's like their heart and soul are one. Dusha, it's the Russian word for soul. And that's what he believes. So not only would it be a military disaster, it would be a historical disaster. Putin wants to be remembered as a legend. It's no secret. He wants his legacy to be legendary. And securing Ukraine for Russia would be a legendary feat for him. Because although the world is very against Russia at this point, Russians themselves have always adored and supported Vladimir Putin. He's been president for 25 years, except for that one time when those pesky term limits got in the way. And so he served as prime minister for a couple of years. But while that happened, the term limit laws dissipated, and he's been president ever since. So let's look at an official timeline of events that led up to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, because there is a lot of heavy blame on Europe and the United States for the war happening in the first place. We basically started inching Ukraine closer and closer to joining NATO, despite Putin warning again and again, don't let Ukraine join NATO or I'm going to react, and it's not going to be good. So here's the timeline of events. 1991, the Soviet Union collapses, Ukraine is free, Ukraine becomes a NATO partner. 2014, Putin annexes Crimea, and after that happened, NATO started supplying military equipment, just in case Russia tried to take over any more Ukrainian territory. Then, in 2019, Ukraine amended its constitution to include a commitment to pursue membership in NATO. So they put it in writing. They were like, we want to join NATO. It is officially in our constitution, which obviously made Putin incredibly nervous. Then in 2020, NATO decided that Ukraine was going to be an enhanced opportunities partner, which deepened Ukraine's military cooperation with NATO and signaled to Putin that he had already basically lost Ukraine to the West. But it gets worse. There's more. At the 2021 NATO summit, NATO leaders reaffirmed that Ukraine would eventually become a NATO member. Also in 2021, the Biden administration increased diplomatic engagement with Ukraine and imposed new sanctions on Russia. So major US diplomats were flying to Ukraine all the time to talk military strategy. So then, in late 2021, President Putin issued a warning to NATO and to the West and to the United States. And he basically demanded guarantees that NATO would not expand any further, meaning that they wouldn't take Ukraine. And it was dismissed. It was ignored. They didn't even respond to it, which was the last straw for Vladimir Putin. So he galvanized all of his troops and he launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine that killed 140,000 people. And all of this was because we just couldn't let go of the idea of having Ukraine in our military club. Tens of thousands of lives lost, trillions of dollars in funding wars because we want Ukraine to join our military club so badly. There's no reason why we can't have a good relationship with Russia. I'm sure that Russia would behave better if it was part of our alliance. And I know that they were once part of the G8 and then we kicked them out, but I feel like that's not the same thing. Putin himself, and I think also Boris Yeltsin, mentioned in multiple interviews that they would be open to talks of joining NATO. Could you imagine?
At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, Do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen?
Он сказал, ты знаешь, это интересно.
Suddenly he said, you know, it's interesting. I think so.
Встретились. Уже на
But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, you know, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now.
Можете спросить у него. Но я думаю, наши...
You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview. He'll confirm it. I wouldn't have said anything like that if it hadn't happened. Okay.
Were you
It's
sincere?
impossible now.
Would you have joined NATO?
Послушайте,
Look, I asked the question, is it possible or not? And the answer I got was no. If I was insincere in my desire to find out what the leadership position was,
But if he had said yes, would you have joined NATO?
если бы он...
if he had said yes, the process of rapprochement would have commenced, and eventually it might have happened if we had seen some sincere wish on the other side of our partners. But it didn't happen. Well, no means no. Okay.
And so far, it seems like, I hate that I have to go here every time, but it seems like Trump is the only one who has ever, literally ever, tried to smooth over our diplomatic relations with Russia. During the Trump administration, no major wars broke out. And a lot of people say, oh, they would have, it's not Biden's fault, it would have happened anyway. But it was under the Biden administration that all of these things happened with, talks with NATO about Ukraine joining NATO. It's the joining of NATO that led to this war in the first place. They didn't officially join NATO, but it was made official. The plans were officiated. And so then when I hear Trump say things like this,
I believe I will be able to make a deal between President Putin and President Zelensky quite quickly.
I'm like, yeah, I believe it.
Господин Трамп, как кандидат в президенты, заявляет о том, что он готов и хочет остановить войну на Украине, мы к этому относимся вполне серьезно. Я не знаком, разумеется, с его возможными предложениями по поводу того, как он собирается это сделать. И это, конечно, ключевой вопрос. Но я не сомневаюсь, что он говорит это искренне, и мы это поддержим.
I totally believe that he would sit down and have a meeting and talk it out and try to find a solution. Now, the risk here is bending to the will of Vladimir Putin and giving him parts of Ukraine. We don't want that to happen. But why do we think that would happen? Because when you look at the record of Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, I remember during the debate, she was like, he loves dictators. He loves President Xi.
it is well known that he admires dictators, and it is absolutely well known that these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear. They can manipulate you with flattery and favors.
How can you say that and in the same debate talk about Trump's tariffs with China? The tariffs against China that Trump imposed were the most brutal foreign policy that we have ever had against China. And then there's that whole thing with the European Union and NATO. Yes, Trump wanted to pull out of NATO, but did you Google why? The reason is that, first of all, in 2014, all of the NATO countries agreed 2% of our GDP was to go towards the NATO defense budget by 2024. That was the plan. 10 years, 2%. By the time Trump got into office, none of the countries had met that goal except for the United States and Greece, Poland, and I think it was Estonia. So the superpowers like Germany and France and Canada and the Netherlands, none of these countries met their financial obligations, and the United States ended up picking up the extra weight and paying 3.5% of our GDP by 2017, which wasn't fair. It wasn't fair to the United States, and it was especially unfair to the struggling nations that did meet their financial debts. It's totally messed up. So basically, Donald Trump was like, excuse me.
But 23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States. And many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years. and not paying in those past years. Over the last 8 years, the United States spent more on defense than all other NATO countries combined. If all NATO members had spent just 2% of their GDP on defense last year, we would have had another $119 billion for our collective defense and for the financing of additional NATO reserves.
Now, I don't agree with the way he did that. Personally, I think that threatening our allies is not a very diplomatic thing to do. It's not very smart. In any case, my point is that why would he bend to the will of dictators and enemies when he won't even bend for our own allies or people in his own cabinet? Anyway, my personal opinion is that the way the West handled the conflict was childish and irresponsible. Taking all these steps to bring Ukraine into NATO because we got greedy with our military reach. We got greedy about our military power and we wanted Ukraine. Ukraine wanted us too. Ukraine wanted to join NATO. You know, what do you say to that? No? Well, maybe. Maybe you do, because you know that it's going to escalate into a full-blown war with Russia. It's hard being a swing voter. It's hard being a voter at all. I mean, if you're subscribed to a party and you're like, yay, Democrats, or like, yay, Trump, like, good for you. I'm so happy that you have subscribed to a team and that the details are not that important to you. But the details, if the details matter right now, you're pulling out your hair. Swing voters are going insane right now. So, yeah, stay tuned. Thank you for watching Swing Voter Central.